Welcome to session 2 of our study on the first book of Esdras. Today we're going to read chapters 3 and 4, which tells the story of three young men, bodyguards of the Persian king Darius I, often titled A Debate in the Persian Court. In this narrative, the young men discuss what each thinks is the most superior thing in the world. This story is not found in 2 Chronicles, Ezra, or Nehemiah, or anywhere else in the Bible. It appears to be totally original with the first book of Esdras. We'll begin this session by talking about the types of literature found in the Apocrypha and which books are included in the canon in each branch of Christianity. But before that, we begin with a prayer. Oh God, our Father, open our eyes and enlighten our minds as we study your word. So grant that our minds may know your truth and our hearts may feel your love, and then confirm and strengthen our wills that we may go out to live what we have learned. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. For a minute, we're going to talk about the types of literature found in the Apocrypha. Just like the Old Testament, there is a variety of literature found here. Judith, Tobit, Susanna, and Bel and the Dragon are short historical fictions written to convey a moral point as well as to entertain. Except for Judith, which is set in Judah, the rest are sometimes referred to as diaspora novels, since they are all set in the Jewish diaspora of Mesopotamia. Bel and the Dragon is a court tale in which the hero's relationship with the king provides the conflict of the plot. Bel and the Dragon and Suzanne are sometimes referred to as ancient detective stories. Tobit concerns the suffering of the righteous. Judith concerns a threat to the people from the foreign army. The expanded Greek version of Esther deals with faithful Jews living among non-Jewish populations. Esther is also considered to be historical fiction. Third Maccabees has nothing to do with the Maccabean period, but deals with a period about a half a century prior or earlier and concerns the sufferings of Jewish community in Egypt. It's a religious novel written in Greek by an Alexandrian Jew sometime about 30 BC. The Prayer of Manasseh is a hymnic lament of great feeling and literary skill. The Prayer of Azariah and the Song of the Three Jews are both modeled on psalms that are liturgical in form. Psalm 151 celebrates the prowess of the young David in slaying Goliath. It's also a psalm. The letter of Jeremiah may have provided later Christian writers an example of how the letter form could combine theological content with a direct and personal approach. There were no other letters in the Old Testament. Second Esdras, which is quite different from First Esdras, purports to reveal the future and is considered to be an apocalypse, similar to Revelation in the New Testament. There are 4 examples of wisdom or didactic literature in the Apocrypha: the wisdom of Solomon, the wisdom of Jesus, son of Seresh, or sometimes just called Seresh, or sometimes Ecclesiasticus. 4 Maccabees, which is unrelated to the other 3 books by the similar name, and Baruch, which also has elements of historical and devotional writing as well. First and Second Maccabees are histories that give versions of the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucid king Antiochus IV in the 2nd century BCE. First Esdras, the book we're studying now, it's also considered a history, and it tells the story of the exile, the return from exile, the rebuilding of the temple, and the leadership of Ezra. As we have said before, all books of the Apocrypha have not been accepted by all branches of Christianity. So which books are accepted as canonical and considered to be sacred scripture? 10 of these books are accepted as canonical in the Roman Catholic Church. Those same 10 books have been accepted as canonical in the Greek Orthodox and the Slavonic or Russian Orthodox Church. However, the Greek and the Russian Orthodox churches also accept First Esdras, the Prayer of Manasseh, Psalm 151, and Third Maccabees. The Russian Orthodox Church also accepts Second Esdras. The Latin Vulgate appendix includes First Esdras, the Prayer of Manasseh, and Second Esdras. The Greek appendix includes the fourth book of Maccabees. Now that's in the appendix, not necessarily canonical. None of these books of the Apocrypha are accepted as sacred scripture in most Protestant churches. That, of course, doesn't mean we can't find them anywhere. Several modern translations of the Bible print versions that include all the books of the Apocrypha in a separate section. The New Revised Standard Version, which includes the updated New Revised Standard Version, the Common English Bible, and the New English Bible all have written versions that include the Apocrypha. We're now going back to the history of the exile period for a couple of minutes. The text of 1st Esdras gives us some general information, but left out some historical detail that may help us in understanding the background of the exile period. At the Battle of Carchemish in 605, the armies of Egypt, allied with the remnants of the army of Assyria, were defeated by the armies of the Babylonia, the Medes, the Persians, the Scythians. Babylon became the new big dog in the Near East. After the Battle of Carchemish, Judah's king Jehoiakim began paying tribute to Babylon. However, after 4 years, he stopped, and in 597, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, laid siege to Jerusalem. King Jeroboam died during the siege, and his successor, Jeconiah, and his court were exiled to Babylon, along with many others. Zedekiah, Jeconiah's successor, revolted against Babylon because he expected protection from the Egyptians. Jeremiah and others warned against this revolt to no avail. Jerusalem was again besieged, and many other people of Jerusalem starved to death. In 586, the city walls were destroyed. Many of the houses and much of the city was destroyed, including the temple. Zedekiah was captured. His sons were killed in front of him. He was blinded and taken to Babylon. Some Jewish survivors were allowed to stay in Jerusalem and the surrounding land of Judah. Many were killed, and many were carried off to exile in Babylon. As we said last week, Cyrus the Great of Persia attacked and defeated the Babylonians in 539. He allowed some Jews to return to Jerusalem in the following year and began rebuilding process. A smaller temple was completed in 515, beginning what is called the Second Temple period. The Ark of the Covenant, housed in the original temple, was never recovered. There's evidence the destruction of the temple in 586 gave rise to synagogues, both in Jerusalem and in Babylon, for public worship and religious instruction. The focus shifted from animal sacrifices, which could only be properly performed in the temple, to the study and eventually the teaching of the Torah, which became the focal point of worship in the synagogues. There is no longer a temple, and there was plenty of opportunity for them to assimilate into the Babylonian culture. But the Jews exiled in Babylon were allowed to continue the practice of their own religion. A new class of professional clergy was created within Judaism, the rabbi. The rabbi was both a scholar and a teacher, a spiritual leader, tasked with explaining God's expectations to the common people. Early rabbis compiled the Talmud, a series of writings that further explains the Torah, beginning during the early exile period. Even after the temple was rebuilt, many aspects of Jewish worship that began during that captivity continued. These included prominent use of the singing of psalms, prayer, and instruction as a part of the synagogue service. Synagogue worship and rabbinical teaching continued to operate alongside the newly constructed temple. So now we move on with chapter 3 of the first book of Esdras. The time is now during the reign of Darius I of Persia. According to the chronology given by our author, Darius I would have followed Artaxerxes, the king who stopped building the temple that we read about in chapter 2. So chapter 3, the first 3 verses. Now King Darius gave a great banquet for all who were under him, all who were born in his house, and all the nobles of Media and Persia, and all the satraps and generals and governors who were under him, in the 127 satrapies, from India to Ethiopia. They ate and drank, and when they were satisfied, they went away, and King Darius went to his bedroom. He went to sleep, but woke up again. A satrap was a provincial governor. Satrapies refers to province. The numbers here don't really jive with the historical record. There were never anything approaching 127 provinces in the Persian Empire. The whole story we are about to read may have been a popular story at the time that has been adapted or elaborated to fit the context of the story that we're working on. So we go on with verse 4. Then the 3 young men of the bodyguard who kept guard over the person of the king said to one another, "Let each of us state what one word is strongest, and to the one whose statement seems wisest, King Darius will give rich gifts and the great honors of victory. He shall be clothed in purple and drink from gold cups and sleep on a gold bed and have a chariot with gold bridles and a turban of fine linen and a necklace around his neck. And because of his wisdom he shall sit next to Darius and shall be called kinsman of Darius." So the story may remind us a little bit of Daniel and his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the court of the king. But the theme of a king making extravagant promises at a banquet is one that's well known during this period. So we go on. Verse 8. Then each bodyguard wrote his own statement, and they sealed them and put them under the pillow of King Darius and said, "When the king wakes, they will give him the writing, and to the one whose statement the king and the 3 nobles of Persian judge to be wisest in the victory shall be given according to what is written." The first one wrote, "Wine is strongest." The second wrote, "The king is strongest." The third wrote, "Women are strongest." But of all things, truth is victor. When the king awoke, they took the writings and gave it to him, and he read it. Then he sent and summoned all the nobles of Persia and Media and the satraps and generals and governors and prefects. And he took his seat in the council chamber, and the writing was read in their presence. He said, "Call the young men, and they shall explain their statements." So they were summoned and came in. They said to them, "Explain to us what you have written." Then the first, who had spoken of the strength of wine, began and said, "Gentlemen, how is wine the strongest? It leads astray the minds of all who drink it. It makes equal the mind of the king and the orphan, the slave and the free, the poor and the rich. It turns every thought to feasting and gladness and forgets sorrow and debt. It makes all hearts feel rich, forgets kings and satraps, and makes everyone talk of extravagant sums. When people drink, they forget to be friendly with friends and kindred, and before long they draw their swords. And when they recover from wine, they do not remember what they have done. Gentlemen, is not wine the strongest, since it forces people to do these things?" When he had said this, he stopped speaking. So there's an ambiguity in the speech praising wine. In part, it's praised for itself, for the release from anxiety and care which it provides. In part, the speech is a warning against the danger of succumbing to the strength which is inherent in wine. The warnings against the overindulgence are found frequently in wisdom literature, which is much of it is found in the same time period that this was written. Let's go on to chapter 4. Then the second, who had spoken of the strength of the king, began to speak. "Gentlemen, are not men strongest who rule over the land and sea and all that is in them? But the king is stronger. He is their lord and master, and whatever he says to them, they obey. If he tells them to make war on one another, they do it. And if he sends them out to kill out against the enemy, they go and conquer mountains, walls, and towers. They kill and are killed and do not disobey the king's command. If they win the victory, they bring everything to the king, whatever spoil they take and everything else. Likewise, those who do not serve in the army or make war but till the soil, whenever they sow and reap, they bring to the king, and they compel one another to pay taxes to the king. And yet he is only one man. If he tells them to kill, they kill. If he tells them to release, they release. If he tells them to attack, they attack. If he tells them to lay waste, They lay waste. If he tells them to build, they build. If he tells them to cut down, they cut down. If he tells them to plant, they plant. All his people and his armies obey him. Furthermore, he reclines. He eats and drinks and sleeps. But they keep watch around him. And no one may go away to attend his own affairs, nor do they disobey him. Gentlemen, why is not the king the strongest, since he is to be obeyed in this fashion? And he stopped speaking. So if the speech on wine has many modern associations, the speech on the power of the king is less familiar to us. The Persian kings are often praised because of their humanness in comparison with the Assyrians and the Babylonians. But all of the available evidence suggests that they were still absolute rulers, and their word was law. So let's go on with verse 13 in the speech in the praise of women. Then the third, who had spoken of women in truth, and this was Zerubbabel, began to speak. Gentlemen, is not the king great? And are not men many? And is not wine strong? Who is it then who rules them, or who has mastery over them? Is it not women? Women give birth to the king and to every people that rules over sea and land. From women they came, and women brought up the very men who plant vineyards, and from which comes wine. Women make men's clothes. They bring men glory. Men cannot exist without women. If men gather gold and silver or any other beautiful thing, and then they see a woman lovely in appearance and beauty, they let all those things go and gape at her with an open mouth and stare at her, and all prefer her to gold or silver or any other beautiful thing. A man leaves his own father who brought him up and his own region and clings to his wife. With his wife he ends his days, with no thought of his father or his mother or his region. Therefore, you must realize that women rule over you. Do you not labor and toil and bring everything and give it to women? A man takes his sword and goes out to travel and rob and steal, to sail the sea and rivers. He faces lions and he walks in darkness. And when he steals and robs and plunders, he brings it back to the woman he loves. A man loves his wife more than his father or his mother. Many men have lost their minds because of women and have become slaves because of them. Many have perished or stumbled or sinned because of women. And now, do you not believe me? We notice that the young man who begins the speech praising women has a name, Zerubbabel. There is only one Zerubbabel in the Old Testament, so this should be a clue to us that this guy may be important. The argument here of the female behind the throne is unusual for the Old Testament. There are many heroines in the Bible, but as a whole it is unusual to hear the claim that women as being stronger than kings. In the story of Esther, we also hear about the power of women. Here, the third contestant seems to be truly in a debate in which he challenges the views of the first two. So we go on the last part of verse 28. Is not the king great in his authority? Do not all lands fear to touch him? Yet I have seen him with Apame, the king's concubine, the daughter of the illustrious Barticus. She would sit at the king's right hand and take the crown from the king's head and put it on her own and slap the king with her left hand. At this the king would gaze at her with mouth agape. If she smiles at him, he laughs. If she loses her temper with him, he flatters her so that she may be reconciled to him. Gentlemen, why are not women strong since they do such things? So strong arguments, but here in the next few verses, the young man diverges from his discourse on women, talks about truth. Verse 33. Then the king and the nobles looked at one another, and he began to speak about truth. Gentlemen, are not women strong? The earth is vast, and heaven is high, and the sun is swift in its course. For it makes the circuit of the heavens and returns to its place in one day. Is not the one who does these things great? But truth is great and stronger than all these things. The whole earth calls upon truth, and heaven blesses it. All the works quake and tremble, and with it there is nothing unrighteous. Wine is unrighteous, the king is unrighteous, women are unrighteous, all humans are unrighteous. All their works are unrighteous, and all such things. There is no truth in them, and in their unrighteousness they will perish. But truth endures and is strong forever, and lives and prevails forever and ever. With it there is no partiality or preference, but it does what is righteous instead of anything that is unrighteous or wicked. Everyone approves its deeds, and there is nothing unrighteous in its judgment. To it belongs the strength of the kingship and the power and the majesty of all the ages. Blessed be the God of truth. When he stopped speaking, all the people shouted and said, Great is truth, and strongest of all. No explicitly religious themes have been present in the first three speeches, and they are not prominent here, but at least this speech is much closer to the kinds of religious belief familiar to Jewish readers and to those sympathetic to Judaism. Let's go on to verse 42. Then the king said to Zerubbabel, Ask what you wish, even beyond what is written, and we will give it to you. For you have been found to be the wisest. You shall sit next to me and be called my kinsman. Then he said to the king, Remember the vow that you made on the day when you became king to build Jerusalem and to send back all the vessels that were taken from Jerusalem, which Cyrus set apart when he began to destroy Babylon and vowed to send them back there. You also vowed to build the temple, which the Edomites burned when Judea was laid waste by the Chaldeans. And now, O Lord the King, this is what I ask and request of you, and this befits your greatness. I pray, therefore, that you fulfill the vow whose fulfillment you vowed to the King of heaven with your own lips. Then King Darius got up and kissed him, and wrote letters for him to all the treasurers and governors and generals and satraps, that they should give safe conduct to him and to all who were going up with him to build Jerusalem. And he wrote letters to all the governors in Cilicia and Phoenicia and to those in Lebanon to bring the cedar timber from Lebanon to Jerusalem and to help him build the city. He wrote in behalf of all the Jews who were going up from his kingdom to Judea, in the interest of their freedom, that no officer or satrap or governor or treasurer should forcibly enter their doors, that all the region that they would occupy should be theirs without tribute, that Idumeans should give up the villages of the Jews that they held, that 20 talents a year should be given for the building of the temple until it was completed, and an additional 10 talents a year for burnt offerings to be offered on the altar every day in accordance with the commandment to make 17 offerings, and that all who come from the Babylonians to build the city should have freedom, they and their children, and all the priests who came. He wrote also concerning their support and the priests' vestments in which they were to minister. He wrote that the support for the Levites should be provided until the day when the temple would be finished and Jerusalem built. He wrote that land and wages should be provided for all who guarded the city. And he sent back from Babylon all the vessels that Cyrus had sent apart. Everything that Cyrus had ordered to be done, he also commanded to be done and sent to Jerusalem. The relevance of this episode to the condition of the Jews is now spelled out. There are details here which do not correspond with the other accounts of this restoration, even with what is said elsewhere in this specific book. But a concern for historical accuracy has never been a major feature of this work. The main point is the reward of God for his faithful community. The role of Zerubbabel here is greatly emphasized, and suggestion has been made that first estrades originated from a group which understood the important parts of the restoration as having been played by Zerubbabel and Ezra. In the book of Ezra, no indication is given of the date of Zerubbabel's arrival in Jerusalem. In view of the importance and confusion between his role and that of Sheshbazzar, the issue is still open. Let's go on to verse 58. When the young man went out, he lifted up his face to heaven toward Jerusalem and praised the King of heaven, saying, From you comes the victory, and from you comes wisdom, and yours is the glory. I am your servant. Blessed are you who have given me wisdom. I give you thanks, O Lord of our ancestors. So he took the letters and went to Babylon and told this to all of his kindred. And they praised the God of their ancestors because they had given them freedom and permission to go and build Jerusalem and the temple that is called by his name. And they feasted with music and rejoicing for 7 days. So Zerubbabel's prayer here is really a psalm and might have been set out in poetic form. It's characteristic of the literature of the late Old Testament period to emphasize the importance of prayer. We are told that he sets off for Babylon, but we've not been given any indication of where the events with King Darius are supposed to have happened. We don't know where he is, but he's going to Babylon. The Persian Empire did not have one fixed capital. So again, don't know where he was. We also notice that this episode ends as it begins with a feast. In session 3, we'll read chapters 5 and 6, the rebuilding of the temple, part 1, the return to Jerusalem with the exiles, worship is restored, the foundation of the temple is laid, and official permission is granted to rebuild. Our second Zoom discussion session will be Monday, January 22nd at 6:30 p.m. If you'd like to participate, don't forget to let me know. You can send an email to online.classes@northgateumc.org, and I'll send you the Zoom link. Have a good week.